Hello, this is Nick and welcome to my dusty garage and to part 4 of my entry into the Great Guitar Build-Off 2021. So to recap, in part 1, I showed you how I started to go about reverse engineering the guitar made by Rick Turner called the Model 1. And in that first episode, I showed you some of the jigs that I made to radius the body. And I'm building 2 guitars. The first one is a prototype made out of bits of leftover wood. And then the second one is a more traditional one made out of mahogany and maple. In the second episode, I showed you how I made the necks. And in the third episode, I went through making the body of the main guitar, the traditional guitar. In this episode, I'm going to show you how I put on the veneers for the headstock, the inlays on the fretboard and also on the headstock. And I'll also show you the process of getting the neck to fit nicely into the neck pocket. Finally, I'll show you how I went about making the unusual pickup holder for the Model 1 guitar. It's nearly time for me to carve the neck. The tenon joint is done and the fit is good. And I've just got rid of a little bit of wood on the heel here to help with the carving process. But before I carve the neck, I've just been putting some veneers. I've already done veneers on the front and I've used 2 veneers. One is ebony, which is underneath. And you might just see it poking out where the truss rod access is. And then on top of that, I put some flame maple. It's part of the original. And that's come out quite well. And you can see by having the darker ebony and the lighter flame maple, it gives a nice pinstripe line down the outside. So the reason I needed to do the veneers before carving the neck is because on the back, I want to try something so that the veneer blends into the volute. And I'm not quite sure how this is done. So I've just had a go by putting a piece of ebony down first, then bird's eye maple. And to get this to go around what is going to be the volute, I had to carve out the volute first, or at least part of it, leave it flat on top, and then bend the veneer over the volute. And to do that, I had to use water and an iron and just encourage the veneer to go up in a curve so that it would follow this shape. And then to glue this on, I just made a piece of MDF with a curve which matched the curve of the volute, and that seems to have glued on quite well. And now what we're left with is the back of the volute here, and I'm going to trim off the excess veneer, and then as I carve the volute and the back of the neck going into the other side of the volute, I'm hoping that I'm going to have a nice effect of the ebony poking through the bird's eye maple to give maybe some sort of pinstripe line around the outside of the volute. That's the hope, and we'll have to see whether it works. So we have crosses in the right place for each of these. Now I'm going to put an inlay around the 12th fret, and I think I will not have fret markers on the fretboard at the 12th fret, because there's something in the inlay that can act as the double dots here. But I will be putting markers along the side. So I'm going to carve the neck by hand. I like to use a Shinto rasp, rasps and files. But the first part of the process is to redraw the center line down the neck and then create a shape from which I can start carving away facets to make sure that the neck is the correct shape and symmetrical. So the next thing to do is to just translate where the 0 fret is, the end of the fretboard, where the 1st fret is, and where the 12th fret is. Translate those around to the other side, and then I can use those as reference points for the carve. Guitar body is now more or less finished. We have the maple cap that has been glued onto the mahogany back. We've got holes drilled for the controls. There will be 3 potentiometers and a switch to control 2 different pickups. This cavity will hold the main magnetic pickup, and the pickup will rotate. We've got the neck pocket, which is routed at an angle so that the angle of the neck should be correct at the bridge. On the other side, we've got a small hole here. This is directly behind the pickup cavity. And this will be used to secure the pickup in place. If it's loosened, then the pickup can be rotated. We've got a cavity for a battery, and this is the cavity for the electronics. We're now at the stage where we need to make sure that the neck is fitting properly. So here is the neck. It hasn't been fretted yet. I'll do that shortly. We've got an inlay and fret markers on the front and the side. We have veneers on the front. There is an ebony veneer and then a maple veneer over the top of that. It's a bird's eye maple, and then a small inlay with my logo on there. And we've got access for the truss rod. I haven't yet made a cover for that. And on the back we've got another pair of veneers, again ebony and bird's eye maple, and I've cut it in such a way as you can see this band of ebony coming through onto the volute. And the neck has now been carved. It's nice and smooth. It still needs a little bit more sanding. And this is the heel, which you'll remember was glued on, and it's made up of a piece of maple and mahogany sandwiched with a veneer of ebony. And down at this end we've got the tenon, and this has actually been very difficult to do because you've got to get lots of angles correct, and I didn't really set out to do this in the right way from the outset, so I've had to do it by hand. But the basic idea is that you need to get this angle here correct so that the neck angle is correct when it fits into the guitar, such that the string height at the bridge is just right. So this angle here is roughly 3.5 degrees. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to check to see whether or not this joint is good. And I think it's okay, but it needs a little bit more work. So the fit into the neck pocket is good. It's tight, but not too tight. And then you can see that that should slide in. Don't know whether you can see it. That should slide in and form a good joint. I'm just going to push it in as hard as I can. Okay, and what we find is that the angle seems to be about right. So the fretboard is sitting nicely over the top of the guitar. We have a small gap here. On the other side, we have a slightly smaller gap. So I need to just work on the area where it's tight to see if I can get this a better fit. And it's not bad, but it just needs a little bit more work. pickup holder, I've got 3 pieces of wood. The first piece of wood is a piece of bibinga that is circular in shape, and I've routed out the top area for a humbucker pickup, which will fit in from underneath. The next piece needs to be hollowed out, and this will have a standard humbucker route using this template that I've made. So the template will be used something like that. So the humbucker will fit in there, and then this last piece will fit on behind. It can be secured from the back of the guitar, and the whole thing will rotate around the center. This is the pickup mounting system that I've made. So we have first of all a top ring. So this is very much like a normal humbucker mounting plate, except it's a different shape. And the pickup is going to be mounted inside like that, with screws going through and springs, so that the height can be adjusted. So to hold this middle ring onto the bottom circle, I've just inserted a couple of cocktail sticks and made some holes. And that will hold it in place like that, and then I think I'll probably screw it in from behind. To make sure that when I glue this front piece on that it doesn't move, I'm going to do the same trick that I use for fretboards, and that is I've driven a couple of nails into this wood and clipped off the tops, so they're just leaving the stub of the nail sticking out. I'll then carefully put this, I'll align this up carefully, press it down to leave a couple of dents in the back of the wood. I'll drill those, and then that should just mean we've got 2 indexing pins so that this doesn't move when it's glued in place.